So welcome to y'all here and everybody online. I've entitled this Rights and Responsibilities in the Classroom for both teachers and students, because what happens is teachers have rights, but they are far more restricted than student rights. And a lot of people don't understand that when I walk into a school building, my Fourth Amendment right, a little bit just goes out the door. That has been debated over and over again, but for the most part, if it's in the school building, it's subject to search, whether it's my personal belongings or not. If it is my purse, they're probably going to have some sort of litigation on their hands unless they have due cause to search my purse. But things that are really important inside school buildings, people need to understand, because it has been my experience, and I'll go through this in just a little bit, that in 20 years of education, oftentimes schools and educational institutions get away with stuff because people don't challenge them. That's why they get away with it. It's not because they can actually do it, it's because people don't challenge them. And so I'm going to start just a little bit about a few things. One, I'm just going to tell you about myself, and then I'm going to tell you how to read a teacher cred in the state of Utah. And then I'll talk a little bit about my credentials. And I don't bring those up in a boastful way, but I bring them up because almost everybody I talk to says, and why should I believe you?
3 pennies.
And how do you know this?
That in the jar.
And tell me all the letters behind your name so that I can trust you. Well, I've also learned that a lot of letters don't mean you should trust somebody, but I got a lot of letters. I think I'm up to 12 now. So I'll go through that really fast. And so I want to make certain, if you are online, make certain that you chat to us if you're having any struggles so that we can do that. I'm looking at the chat on a pretty regular basis here. And then also, if you have questions here locally, let me know and we'll figure it out. So my teacher credential looks like this. Let's see if it'll go there. Did it go? It didn't like me. How about now? Oh, there it goes. It looks like that. And it is this beautiful document that has my whole name. And then we've got this guy, which tells you that I have a gen ed cred. I can teach in the general education classroom without restriction. I don't have any restrictions on that license. In 20 years, I used it for 3 years. But I do have a credential to teach K through 6 in the public school system in the gen ed classroom. Over here on the right, those are my endorsements that are added to that license. Now in the state of Utah, I have an endorsement in elementary music education. I have an endorsement in gifted education, and I have an endorsement in what's called arts integration into the primary classroom, so an arts integrated instruction. I have a school leadership credential, which is superintendent, principal, district level leadership, things like that. And then I also have a secondary ed cred in both gifted and talented and music education. So beyond that, and then that's my Utah cred, which is interesting because a lot of people don't know that you can check your teacher creds online for free. You don't even have to do like any sort of grammar requests. And it is open to the public. You can find this information online and you can question that information online. So if you wanted to find out about me, you could go to cactus.schools.utah.gov, and any teacher in the state, if they've been disciplined by the state, you will know, because I think it's orange now. They put a big orange bar across that says, we have disciplined this person on this date. If you would like more information, file a grammar request. It's very open to the public. You can also find out what credentials your teachers don't have, because many teachers speak with great authority, and while they might not have a lot of knowledge, they might have a lot of knowledge, they might not have that credential. And that credential, it means something, as much as we'll talk later about what it doesn't mean. Just FYI, I got my elementary and my gen ed endorsement in a non-traditional way. I did not get my first undergrad in education. I got my first undergrad in opera and music performance. I got my second undergrad in education. So my credential looks a little different. When I went to get my master's degrees. I started with an ed leadership degree which is principal, superintendent, district level leadership. And then I went on a journey where I wanted to do a lot of things. And so this is my Colorado license. I'm endorsed in elementary education, secondary English language arts, social studies education, 7-12, early childhood, which is a SPED endorsement, 0 through 8, speech, 7 through 12, communications, health ed, K-12, business marketing, 7-12, and drama and theater arts, K-12. So I can teach a lot of things in a lot of states in different capacities. And so I have a lot of training in all sorts of different areas. I recently finished a degree that's going to get me a, it's called Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Education, which comes here to my North Carolina credential, which is, it just is. But this is very recent. I finished that about a month ago. And English language learning is all the rage these days. And it also greatly skews your school data. So you need to understand how English language learners are identified and publicized, because the data is misleading, in my opinion. Coming down the turnpike, just so you know that I know what I'm talking about, I will within the next 3 months have these following endorsements in every state that I'm endorsed in. So I know a lot about the law. I know a lot about school law. And if I don't know, I know where to find it. And I think that when it comes to parents and teachers, knowing where to find it is the biggest battle. And I want to really stress that, and knowing where to find it is the biggest battle. Knowing what you're looking for is another battle. And that brings me to these handy dandy little guys. And when I saw Brooke's video online, I actually giggled and smiled because she says, Christina carries these with her everywhere. And I do carry the Constitution with me everywhere I go. I carry this guy, and then I carry the teachers and students' rights in the public schools, religious liberty at Christmas and other occasions. I carry these with me. And I refer to them more often than you might think, because I have a, what do I want to say?
They don't fit on my door.
Logan, I confirm and then I confront. Because I don't really like people who push people around when they're violating their civil rights. So if you have a pencil, write that down. You confirm and then you confront.
I'll just bring them up.
The only reason schools get away with this stuff is because people don't push back. That's the only reason. And I'm going to tell you a few stories, but if you don't have a pencil, now's a time to get one. Oh, it says, if you are listening online, it says, Christina, please ask all online listeners to mute themselves. So if you're online, if you'd mute yourself, that would be fantastic.
Break for just a second.
We could take a break.
We want to switch the webcam to your.
To mine?
Even though it's looking up your nose because they can't see you.
Oh, no, all
No,
one has to do
it's all good. All I got to do is press this handy dandy little button right there, and they're going to look up my nose.
And then we could also just hook your Bluetooth to this, and then it will be this one.
That's perfect.
So.
Yeah, they can look up my nose. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yep. I waxed my nose 2 weeks ago, so it's good. I told you I'd start joking soon.
Okay, so.
All right. Good. I would rather not mess with my computer too much right
All
now.
right, that sounds good.
I say that lovingly. We got lots of tech going with lots of cords, so.
So many texts, so many cords.
All right, so I think if you've got a pencil, I want you to remember one thing. If you remember nothing else from tonight, I want you to remember one thing that's super important. Are you ready for this? Oh, come on, computer. I'm not an attorney. I do not have a license to practice law in this state or any state. I took the LSAT 20 years ago, scored really well, and had a baby. So my life took a different turn, and that's okay, but I do love the law. All right, but I am not an attorney, and so you cannot interpret anything I say as legal advice. I'm just giving you information, right? But I want you to remember in cohort with that your child's teacher is not an attorney either. And a lot of teachers say a lot of things that simply aren't true. They might believe that they're true. They might earnestly think that they're telling you factual things, but they're not an attorney. And if you want to know their credentials, you go to cactus.schools.utah.gov. So those things are important. The next thing I want you to remember, and I'm going to start busting through this 100 miles an hour, is that your child attends a government school. And it's something that you really need to understand. They don't attend a public school, they attend a government school. It's funded by the government. It's regulated by the government. It is a government school. So understanding your rights within that institution is super important. And that starts with the Bill of Rights. And when I ask people if they understand the Bill of Rights, without fail, many people think that the First Amendment is the first five. They have no clue that the First Amendment encompasses all of these things: freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition the government. People will list all those without realizing they've only listed the First Amendment. And it makes people's heads spin, and rightfully so. But when it comes to schools, I want to distill this down for you, and you're really looking at something like that. Those are the things that you're really looking at when you're coming to schools and rights. And then you got a lot of SCOTUS rulings and laws that come in every state. But if we're dealing with the federal level and your rights within the school system, you're talking about freedom of speech. It's a big one, huge, especially for students. Teacher speech is greatly limited in the classroom, as it should be. Freedom of religion, which students have. And also teachers have. A lot of teachers they try to convince us that we don't have that right. We absolutely do have that right. And more teachers should exercise it on a regular basis. The freedom of assembly and the right to petition the government. Your Fourth Amendment has been heavily debated in the school circles for years. If you have a pencil, write this down. It's called New Jersey versus TLO. It will almost always be your governing SCOTUS document for the Fourth Amendment rights inside the school system, but in particular for students. Your Fifth Amendment, a lot of kids don't understand that they have Fifth Amendment rights in school. They can say, I don't want to talk to you until my parent is here. They can say that. The principal or the teacher might not like them very much when they do, but they can say, I don't want to have this conversation without my parent present. They have a right to that, and they need to know and understand that that is a right that they have. They have a right against property seizure within the school system. And we'll talk about that more after a little bit. The Sixth Amendment, which is, it sounds a little weird, but if they were to be challenged, the school system would lose if they were to discipline a child and not tell them what they were disciplined for. They have a right to know what they've been charged with. They have a right to confront witnesses, should that be something that is necessary. And again, schools write policy all the time. They write policy, and unless somebody pushes back, they get away with it. I'm going to tell you a story about that in just a little bit. You have a right to call witnesses and a right to legal counsel, even inside your school walls. Those are rights. And parents need to push back on that, and students need to push back on that. I'm certain that this is like very exciting stuff, because I do get it. I really do. I carry these with me. If you can see my books, I carry these with me, and I do refer to them. And if you haven't written it down, you confirm and you confront. You confirm that you are right, and you confront, you push back. And I do carry these with me everywhere I go. And so it is super important. And I want to talk first about freedom of speech. And we're going to go right here. I think there it is. Your child or your student rights are not voided by the opinion or comfort level of their teacher or their principal at the school. And I bring that up because we are living in a day and age where words like safe space, triggered, trauma-informed. You can't say that. This is a trauma-informed space. Student speech is limited inside the school system in different capacities, but trauma-informed is not one of them. Triggered is not one of them. Cognitive dissonance is part of the learning process. And we can talk about the brain and how it changes and morphs and develops over time and matures. But great cognitive dissonance should not be introduced to children until about the age of 16, 15, 16, sometimes 17, especially if they're boys, because the brain has not developed to the point where it can actually engage in that cognitive dissonance. But it is a learning space, and your child has a right to ask questions, and they have a right to say, in my home, we believe. And in my opinion, they've crossed the line. And this is probably about the time to tell you I've taught for 20 years in the public school system, and my own children don't attend public school. And I believe in educating the masses, but when we moved to Utah, there was something different here, and we put our children in alternative education. So I'm going to tell you what else your children's rights are not voided by. Are you ready for this one? It's good. School policy. The rights that you as parents have and the rights that your children have are not voided by bad school policy. So I'm gonna tell you a story. In the past 18 months alone, I have seen, reviewed, and investigated an entire set of school districts' policies. 600 pages of policy. And in that, and when I tell you we dug hard, because the policies were just bad in general. And it wasn't a Utah district, but we dug. And in those policies, we found over 20 policies that conflicted with SCOTUS rulings, 20 policies that conflicted with the Bill of Rights, 20 policies that conflicted with just basic law. So I went and I confronted this Board of Education. I hopped 2 state lines, drove in my little vehicle, stood up, and sounded like an intelligent individual for 7 minutes. And when I confronted the board and the superintendent about it, I delineated those infractions one by one, and I cited the law and said, you cannot have a policy book that does this to kids. It's a violation of their civil rights. I was super excited that they stopped the meeting to confer with legal counsel. Because their superintendent said, I don't know if we should vote on this. She seemed serious, y'all. You know, and I only talk Southern when I'm either being sassy with kids or I'm being very serious with adults, right? And what was funny was they came back into session, and I'm not joking with you, in any way, shape, or form. The board president sits down, he calls the meeting to order, and he says, I've consulted with our legal counsel, and he has advised us that if we were to ever be sued, we would lose. But policies should stand. I'm quoting, the policies should stand, even though she is right. Those policies are an invasion of student rights. They are a violation of the 4th Amendment. They're a violation of the 1st Amendment. They're a violation of Nebraska legislative code. Yeah, rattle it off, right? And the attorney advised them to let the policies stand because they should only change them as a result of settlement in a lawsuit, which is oftentimes how policies get changed. People push back and they finally change the policies. And I have since then, I have reviewed more policies here in Utah and in other states. And the reality is districts write policies that don't align with the law. It happens all the time. And for parents and students to assume that everything that's in that student handbook and everything that's in district policy is absolutely 100% legal is naive at best. And I'm not calling any Utah district out. What I am telling you is look at your policies and ask hard questions. And don't be afraid to ask hard questions. 2 state lines away, their legal counsel advised them to let them stand, even though on every single issue, if they were challenged legally, they would lose. He called it de facto, which is my understanding is it's not even debatable, you'd lose, period. So people really do need to push back. And I just want to encourage you to push back. Push back because it's right for America. Push back because it's right for your kids. Push back because it's what's right. Our founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. It's in the Declaration of Independence, and we can't ask a question. And I've had my own internal conflict on coward, Christina. Coward much? I go to bed at night and think about my own cowardice. It took me a long time just to speak publicly on some of these issues, a long time. Even though I knew what was right, it took me a long time. People lost their lands and their homes over the Declaration of Independence. We should at least be able to ask a question. We should have that much strength. So I really want to encourage you to ask a question. And as we move through this document, we're going to talk about how students' rights inside of schools are modified. And usually that's why. And I'm going to give you one word, and it's SCOTUS. If you hear that, it stands for Supreme Court of the United States. It's a term used often in the law, in the legal profession, but it's also, you'll hear it inside the school. It's a SCOTUS ruling. We can't touch that. And it sounds really fancy. Sounds like someone's really smart. It's a SCOTUS ruling, right? Well, if you say that in a room full of people who don't know that and they don't use that term, it sounds, yeah, don't let people confuse you. It's the Supreme Court of the United States. And through the years, the Bill of Rights has been debated for what is encouraged and what can happen inside school systems. And the petitioning and grieving of the government has resulted in multiple Supreme Court rulings as it relates to school, some recent, some not so recent, but they're still applied. There's a rule on the books that the Supreme Court struck down in 1923 that has grave impact 100 years later. Grave impact. And I get excited. I'm like, woohoo, go Supreme Court, because it's one about parents' rights. And it is referenced still today because it's about parents' rights. And so if you got a pencil, you should be writing some of these down, because if you have a problem inside the school system, these are your big ones, the big hitters. So free speech is Tinker versus Des Moines. It governs students' rights to free speech, specifically free speech inside the school. And Tinker versus Des Moines happened a long time ago. I think we're looking at like 40 years now. I could be wrong, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. Heavily debated, went all the way to the Supreme Court. And a student stood up for herself, and that's on my notes, sorry. It says that, Tinker versus Des Moines says that, I paraphrase, schools have to have reasonable documentation or suspicion of a material and substantial disruption to the educational process in order to censor the speech of a student. Something like that. Read the ruling. But they have to have material and substantial disruption, I believe is the language used. Now, it's also been debated about free speech in the classroom. And I will tell you that I will silence a kid lickety-split if A, he tries to derail my lesson and suck up my time. And the Supreme Court has ruled that I can do so. If you would like to talk about recess, you may do so at recess. Right now, we're talking about this. Teachers do have that right. They do have the right to maintain focus and discipline in their classroom. What they cannot do is say, you can't wear that shirt, I don't like it. If you're in a civics classroom and you have a dissenting point of view, they can't say, we're not talking about that right now. If it's on the table, if it's the discussion at hand, your child has a right to speak. They do not have a right to swear. They do not have a right to be disrespectful and dysfunctional. They do not have a right to throw things and act like a 3-year-old child throwing a fit, but they do have a right to speak and defend their thoughts. And teachers cannot question it as long as it is related to the subject at hand. That's super important. And there are times that I have said to kids, and it is perfectly within my rights as an educator to do so. That's really interesting. You know, you see the debate coming, right? You see the debate and you see two kids getting ready to go at it. It is well within my rights as an educator to say, you know what? I want you to write it down, and I want you to write it down. And anybody else that has a thought, I want you to write it down. I want you to bring it to me. I'm going to read your thoughts, and then we're going to come back to this tomorrow. That's very different from saying, don't talk, you can talk, right? But if a teacher has a right to mitigate chaos in the classroom, they do have that right. And in my opinion, teachers should offer students the opportunity to disclose their thoughts while still maintaining discipline. And so my go-to often is, I really want you to write it down. I really want you to write it down, think about your thoughts and articulate them. Because when kids start going ad hominem, when they say, oh, you're ugly and your mama dresses, you're funny, and I don't like your shoes, and you wore different earrings, and by the way, your shoes smell, you know, when they go ad hominem, nothing good is going to come of that. And teachers have every right to maintain discipline in their classroom. Every right. Principals have every right to maintain order in the school, but kids have rights too. And when it comes specifically, Tinker versus Des Moines was about an armband that was worn to protest, I believe, the Vietnam War. I could be wrong, man. My brain just went like, just like up in the rafters. And they tried to silence it, and it was determined that they could not silence that speech. They could wear them. There was a case in Colorado. It didn't go very far. There was a woman in the community that had breast cancer, and she had to go through chemo, but she didn't want to have a mastectomy. And a bunch of junior high kids printed up a bunch of t-shirts and sold them to raise money for the family that said, are you ready for this? Save the boobies. They tried to quash that speech and they lost fast and heavy, and Tinker versus Des Moines suffocated the escalation of that to a higher court. It just is what it is. Your kids have rights inside the school system. Now, I would personally be totally petrified if my children went to school with shirts that said save the boobies. I would be utterly petrified. But some parents think it's good and they're going to pay $25 so they can do it. It just is. But your kids have rights, and specifically in the clothing they wear and in engaging in conversation. So those things you need to be aware of. There was a recent free speech SCOTUS ruling that went up fast and furious. It was kind of neat to watch it happen. You know, you see it on Facebook. I don't tweet or whatever they call it. I also don't do the gram thing. Don't do none of that. I'm too old to care. And you see it on Facebook, and I thought, oh, they're going to get hammered. They're going to get hammered. They just dumb. They dumb. I don't know what they're doing. They shot it clear to the Supreme Court, and the school district lost. I was like, man, I'm smart. You know, I feel really good about myself in those moments. Does anybody know what it was about? It was one and done in less than a year.
Talking about the cheerleader?
I am talking about the cheerleader. I am absolutely talking about the cheerleader. And she had that right to her speech. She just simply had that right. And it's the case is called, I think it's Mahoney Area High School versus BL. So when students are underage, they're almost always identified by their initials. New Jersey versus TLO, BL. So that's where that comes from. And it was also a First Amendment issue, specifically her First Amendment rights off campus. They sanctioned her for her speech that was made outside of school time and off school property. They disciplined her in multiple capacities. She swore on Snapchat regarding cheerleading tryouts, said some pretty heinous things about the coach and then about the school. And the Supreme Court said she had every right to say those things, and they could not discipline her for doing so. Clarence Thomas, oddly enough, was the lone dissenter in that case, which if you know much about Clarence Thomas, you're like, really, what? So I have not yet, but I'm super interested to read what he wrote. I'm very interested. When I find dissenters like Clarence Thomas, I go, well, I want to read that. I'm kind of a nerd. I'm a closet nerd. Don't tell your friends. Don't give it away online. I'm a closet nerd. I read Supreme Court rulings for fun. Oh, All right, so that one came, but I wonder, you know, it's a win for the first, right? A win for the First Amendment. And I tell you what, when these rules come down this fast, these rulings come out of the Supreme Court this fast, all you got to do is ask some questions. School districts will learn that they cannot censor your child's speech if you just start asking questions. Push back. There's one court case we're going to talk about right now about a teacher in Loudoun County, Virginia. The ruling came down so fast, I was like, whoa, dude, that's like 2 months, 60 days. And it came down fast. You start pushing these up and these lower courts are going to say they've already ruled, they've already ruled, they've already ruled, they've already ruled. And you will win because you have rights in this country. You do. You just have to push back. And I want to encourage you to always be respectful, but don't be afraid to be bold. Do not be afraid to be bold. I have a little sass in myself. Don't tell your friends that either. All right, so what would have changed this decision? Anybody know? If you're online, you want to chat that to me? What would have changed the decision with the cheerleader? Why or how could or would have the Supreme Court ruled otherwise?
One, if she threatening or inciting violence.
Threatening or inciting violence, regardless of the platform. But is that a school issue or is that a law enforcement issue? It's a law enforcement issue. I agree. Not an attorney, but I agree. Anything else? Yep.
I came in halfway, but I mostly know that.
Mhm.
Was it? I think it was. And they don't, the school doesn't have any.
The school has, nope,
restriction once they leave campus.
nope, they don't, unless they have been charged formally in a court of law. Typically, that is the case. Some states, they have laws, if you're caught drinking off campus, they can sanction you. But typically you have to be caught by law enforcement. So there's a few words that might have, maybe, I don't know, might have changed this ruling. One is school sponsored. If you're in a group text or a group chat that is organized by a school sponsor and you decide to go completely, you know, monkey crazy in there, they can and should be able to discipline your child. If it is school sponsored, school sanctioned, organized by the overseer, and then that overseer or sponsor or chaperone, whatever that might look like, teacher, parent, volunteer, whoever governs that group chat digitally should have disclosed expectations and norms. Because as much as we would like to think that all young people know they should not swear and throw the F-bomb in a group chat, they don't. They have not been duly trained like your children and mine. Not all people tell their children, hey, don't throw the F-bomb at school. Just as a reality, right? And sometimes they don't train them in that digital expectation either. But if that had been a school-sponsored thing, that would be the big one. Facebook group, they could probably govern it regardless of a physical location. If it's a school-sponsored Facebook group, they probably could have governed that speech. They might have been able to govern it if it was a GroupMe sponsored by the school. Remind, any app. Now, Twitter, on the other hand, doesn't work that way. So Twitter, I think, would be off limits, but again, not an attorney. But when you have those group conversations sponsored by the school, they have every right to govern your child's speech, especially when it becomes vile. Let's talk about the Fourth Amendment just a little bit. I heart New Jersey versus TLO. I think it's like one of the coolest SCOTUS rulings ever. And it's often misunderstood and misapplied. And I'm sure that someone will cut and clip this and tell me I'm an idiot, and that's okay. They can say that online. I've learned I no longer care. I'm too old. I am too old to care. I said to it, see, I'm going to tell you a story now. I said to a fifth grader today, they said something to me, I can't even remember what. And I said, you know, it's really good. I do not get my self-worth from 10-year-olds. And this child looked at me and he said, you're not angry? And I said, no, you have every right to your opinion. And I just don't get my self-worth from 10-year-olds. I could tell you lots of stories. So it is the Fourth Amendment, and it's profound. New Jersey versus TLO is profound. So the Cliff Note version goes something like this, and I'm sure that I will get it wrong in some capacity. Just don't destroy me on the internet, okay? So girl is in the bathroom, she's smoking. There's another girl in there. They come out. The principal says, dude, you smell like weed. Calls him into the office. I'm sure lots of other stuff happens. Well, he thus proceeds to search her bag without her consent. She filed under her Fourth Amendment rights. And the court found that you can, with reasonable suspicion, search a student's property without a warrant. But they also defined reasonable suspicion. And they did so well. And there are times that students, in fact, somebody called me, I can't remember when, let's say 3 weeks ago. And they said, my student got called into the principal's office because her friend said something. And I was like, okay. And they just searched her bag. Can they do that? I said, no. No, they can't just do that. Now, there's probably lots of details that I didn't know, but as that person stated it, no, they cannot search your bag. And your child does not have to give them permission. A lot of times teachers or administrators will say things like, I just want to check out what's in here, make sure everything's okay. They don't have that right, and your child has the right to say no. They also have the right to say, I'd like to call my mom and see what she thinks. I'd like my dad to be here when that happens. They have that right, and they should learn to assert those rights. And many times I've learned through the years, a lot of times your upper level administrators, they don't know the law very well. Sometimes they think they can do all these things, and they genuinely think that because it's been going on for so many years and no one's challenged it. It's just become the norm. But you have to have reasonable suspicion to violate the Fourth Amendment inside the school, and reasonable suspicion is defined. New Jersey versus TLO is all up in their grill over that. Read that one. If you want to read a SCOTUS ruling that will help you understand the Fourth Amendment, read New Jersey versus TLO. And we have an issue that comes up a lot. So one of the things my wonderful Nebraskan friends do is they require students, are you ready for this? To park on school property when they go to school. They cannot attend school if they do not park their vehicles on school property. Classy, I know, right? I love your face. I love all y'all got good faces right there. You're like, come again? And right next in the policy says we can search your vehicle at any time because it is parked on school property. It's one that I challenged. You know what the attorney said? Let it stand. If we're sued, we will lose, but let it stand. Yeah. They cannot force you to park on school property to attend school. What if your child walks to school? It's just a little weird. Whole thing's a little weird. Another one I hear a lot is that locker belongs to the school. They can search it at any time, no matter what, doesn't matter what. Not true. There's an implied rental agreement between your student and the school district. And just like a landlord cannot go into a rental property willy-nilly without notice for no reason, the school cannot search your child's locker just because it belongs to them. There's an implied rental agreement. And again, talk to an attorney. If this ever happens to you, talk to an attorney. I'm not an attorney, but that implied rental agreement gives your child what's called a reasonable expectation of privacy. They can't just say, hey, we know somewhere in the building there's pot. We're going to search all the lockers. They can't do that. They would lose. However, if they brought a drug dog into the building and they tapped your kid's locker, they most certainly could search it without a warrant because they have reasonable suspicion. If Miguel went in and said, you know, Jonathan and Francisco, they both have weapons in their locker. They have reasonable suspicion. They absolutely can search a child's locker. But the carte blanche any day, anytime, any hour, not true. They have to have reasonable suspicion. When you have an implied rental agreement, your child has a reasonable expectation of privacy. They have to have reasonable suspicion. And so that implied rental agreement is language that you need to use, because it's just like the apartment is owned by someone else, that locker is owned by someone else. But the minute you check that out, there's an implied rental agreement and you have a reasonable expectation of privacy until such time that the administration or the school resource officer has a reasonable suspicion to search. And that's defined by New Jersey versus TLO. Okay, yes, sir.
I was just gonna say, that if you sign a disclosure that you have read, and it's in there that you allow a disclosure or something like that, then that's, then it answers, right?
I would say don't sign that stuff.
Yeah, but I'm saying a lot of people don't read things, some of those disclosures.
So some of those disclosures I would go back to, if they were sued, they'd lose. And people need to start pushing back. They need to start pushing back. In fact, it wasn't all that long ago, someone called and they said, do you sign this stuff? I said, no, I cross it out. I put it in big red, I cross it out and initial it. I make my own box. I do when I sign authorizations for my kids. I'm like, no, and I make my own box and I'm like, I agree, but under any other circumstances, call me. I make my own box. And a lot of times people call and they say, you can't do that. And I'll say, that's fine. You can keep it on record, but I ain't signing your form. And usually I say ain't, not because it's bad grammar, but because it makes the point. It makes the point that I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to authorize you to publish my child's image wherever you want, whenever you want, making me a de facto supporter of something that I'm not. Because you used my child's image? No, you cannot use him wherever you want to. No, you can call me and get individual authorization on an individual basis. That is fine with me. But you cannot just use their images willy-nilly. No. When it comes to vaccinations, I submit every single year, I submit a vaccination exemption. Believe it or not, my children are vaccinated. I just don't think it's any of their business. I make those decisions on an individual vaccine basis, and I do not think it's anybody's business. So I file the exemption, and a lot of people will make the conclusion, they'll draw the conclusion. And I know many other parents who do the same. And people draw this conclusion, oh, vaccine, it's none of their business. I have a personal theory that the only reason, this is my personal theory, this is not backed up by any data or research or survey or nothing like that. Okay, nothing. I have a personal theory that the only reason they ask for your vaccination card is so they can submit data and violate your medical privacy to the federal government. That is the only reason I believe that they ask for your vaccination card, is for the data. They want you to voluntarily give away your private medical information to the school, because then the school thus has to report. That's my theory. I'm sure I'll get called out. Be a conspiracy theorist. But that's my own theory. You can be exempt from vaccines and still vaccinate your children. It's a right that you have in this state and in this nation. I want to go real quick, and then we're going to go to questions to Meyer versus Nebraska. This is a 100-year-old ruling, 98 years to be exact. And I love this ruling. I love it. SCOTUS came down. It's a fun one. It governs the 14th Amendment. And it struck down a law requiring English as a language, the only language of instruction in schooling options. Nebraska had formulated a law that says no matter how your children are educated, they must be educated in English. And it was pushed through many courts. Specifically, the Supreme Court determined that the law violated part of the due process clause in the 14th Amendment, indicating that no person should be deprived of liberty without due process. I'm quoting the ruling right there. It also indicated that the right of the parent to homeschool and instruct their child in their native language fell under the parents' rights under the Constitution of the United States to educate their children how they see fit. And if they chose to homeschool and educate their children in their native language, they could do that. And because someone had gumption in 1923 or 1922, and they pushed it all the way up, this is still referenced today under the parents' right to determine how their children should be educated. If in the US, a child can legally be educated in a language other than English by and through parental authority, some of these issues are chump change, folks. And to the best of my knowledge, this ruling it stands. They shot it down and said parents have the rights to educate their children as they see fit. And I think it's huge. I get super excited about that one. I'm like, that's a federal level thing. It's not a state level thing. That's a federal level thing. And in Utah, we got good parental rights laws. Nebraska, as we're talking about it, they don't. They're sucking it up left, right, and backward. I call there 3 times a week and say, you need a law that says this. And I'm not joking. I really do that. That wasn't a joke. I really do call senators in Nebraska and say, I got some code for you. I think you should do it in the next legislative session, please. Yeah, I do that for real. My boys think it's funny. They're like, are you talking to the senator again? And I'm like, yes, it's your civic duty to harass your lawmakers. I shouldn't use the word harass. It is your civic duty to engage with those in places that make laws. It is your civic duty to do so. And I was born and raised in Nebraska. I have great love for the state. They recently went through a huge thing. 35,000 Nebraskans wrote the State Board of Education and said, not on my watch. 35,000 people. And all of a sudden, the issue at hand went whoosh. It didn't go, we'll try again. It didn't go, oh, but would you like it this way? They quashed that thing so fast. Head spun. People resigned. Jobs were lost. I was like, yeah, power to the people. There's sex ed standards that they couched under the name of health education. And they said, we got new health standards. And really it was a lot of CSE. It was a lot of things that do not belong in health standards, had nothing to do with eating right, staying fit, and making sure you wear good shoes. It was basically comprehensive sexuality education under the guise of health standards. And they quashed it, and they quashed it fast. So power to the people in Nebraska. So I'm going to tell you something, and I'm sure that all my parents in the room are going to be super excited about this one. Are you ready for it? I make a deal with every parent who accuses me of something. They come to me and they make an accusation, and I go, oh, real? I stayed after work for this? I make them a deal, and that deal is this. I won't believe everything your child says about you if you don't believe everything they say about me. And I've made that deal for years. For years, I've made that deal. And then I've seen some things in the past 7 years that I want to encourage you. Believe everything your child says. And that makes me sad as a professional educator to say that. I want you to believe everything your child says, and I want you to investigate it. I have seen things inside walls and in teacher trainings that cause me grave concern. I say that as a private citizen. Believe your children, believe them, and investigate what they have to say every single time. Choose to believe your children. And verify. Please don't act like a kook. Just believe and verify. Because if you act like a kook, pretty soon you're going to be that mom. And then you have no power if you're that mom or that dad. But sometimes there's a lot of power in being that mom or that dad, especially when you're consistently right. When you're consistently right and you're consistently on the line and you're consistently respectful, it comes with power. It comes with a lot of power. So as we go into this, I have one final slide, believe it or not, and then I just want to open it up to questions, and I'm going to start with some that Brooke asked online. Even if your child says, and this is, I'm kind of hopping around because I want to get your brains turning and then I want to answer your questions. Even if your child says, my mom and dad say, let's say Muslims. My mom and dad say, blah, 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 blah. It's part of our faith tradition. Da, 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 da. Your child's teacher may not, in any state, as I understand it, disparage that child's faith-based viewpoint, even if it is incorrectly stated. And a lot of kids say stuff, and I'm like, dude, I've researched a lot of faiths, and I think you're not frying on all burners there, you know? I think you might have misquoted your mama, right? But I don't say anything disparaging, and teachers should not say anything disparaging. So the big one is, what can they say? Especially when we've already talked about the student's right to speak. They have a right to speak about their faith and defend their point of view. They have a right to speak about their cultural convictions and morality clauses and to defend their point of view. So what can a teacher say? I will tell you, not a lot, but they can say something like, could you please write that down for me? I'd like to research it. They can say, how do I find that? If I were to look it up, where would I look that? Where would I look for that? They can say, do you find that in the Quran? Is that in the Book of Mormon? They can ask that question. They can verify the information. What they cannot do is disparage. They cannot disparage your child's discussion about their faith. It just, first of all, it's just bad form. I can't imagine, you know, in the age of build a relationship, and I'm not really making fun of that. Build a relationship, your religion sucks. Like, who does that? But believe it or not, we hear about it, right? It hits the internet, goes viral. You know, build a relationship, but only with the kids who have no faith. No, that's not the message we receive as teachers. So we need to quash that. Yes, my friend.
So is that just a faith? What about politics?
Politics too. So oddly enough, my unit this fall and I am a music educator and I have standards, and I have decided to teach all my standards through historical music. We start in 1775 and we end in 1964. We cover 200 and some odd years worth of music, worth of history, and we got lots of questions. And I want you to write this down. If you're writing things down, there are never 2 points of view, there are 4 points of view. When you're talking politics, I want you to remember that your teacher has an obligation to represent 4 points of view at least. Okay, at least, in my opinion, if they're doing their job well, they got 4 points of view. One is, let's say it's a left-right issue, Republican, Democrat. We're just going to make that up for right now. So it's the right would argue this, and this is why. The left would argue against it, and this is what they'd say. The Democrats would argue this, and this is why. The right would argue against it, and this is what they'd say. So there's always 4 points of view. The people who are proponents of the issue and why. The opposing team and why they argue against it. Well, what do these guys really want and why? And why do these guys argue against it and what would they say? 4 points of view. In my opinion, to create a politically neutral classroom, you got 4 points of view, not 2. At least 4. And if you bring in the libertarian thing, you got a whole lot of things going on in America, right? So to maintain political neutrality is important. And I tell kids all the time, and I'm not joking, tell kids all the time, they'll say, well, I heard this. And I'll say, I want you to research that. I want you to bring me back your source and we'll take a look at it in class. Do you know how many students actually bring me back their source? And I'll say, until I have your source, we're going to go with my source. And that's fine. You're welcome to contend differently, but I want to look at your source. That's all I want to do. And I don't care what your source is, because I, as a teacher, do not govern student sources. I think it's bad practice. If they haven't learned how to source the internet, then we can teach them how, but I don't believe in policing sources. Like, here's your approved sources, please write this essay. Teachers who do that are not politically neutral at all. 4 points of view, at least 4 to maintain political neutrality, and they cannot disparage political points of view. No, they can argue them, but and when I say they can argue them, they can create an environment for debate. They may not personally disparage. And they should not be arguing a position in their classroom. They should be presenting 4 points of view. Okay, you believe that, the opponents of your position, and they should never personalize it, ever. When a teacher starts to personalize, you got a bad educator. Okay, so I see your point, right? I see your point. I'm hearing you talk. The opponents of your position would probably say something like this. How would you respond to them? And because, you know, I know this issue and I've researched it well or whatever, right? Then the people on this side are saying this and their opponents are responding like this. So as a class, let's figure out where we want to fall. And if we all fall in different places, that's okay. Because in America, you have the right to be wrong. And I will always, as an educator, fight for your right to be wrong. That's a teacher's, in my opinion, it's part of their obligation, is to allow kids the opportunity to grapple with hard issues and come to conclusions. I think it's important as educators. So on that note, I want to go back to these. Get one. Liberty Counsel puts them out. This is the Declaration of Independence, the US Constitution with an index. Patrick Henry, and then an essay by Matthew Staver. I have read those, not lately though. This one is about students' rights in public schools, teachers' rights in public schools, and religious liberty at other seasonal occasions. And these guys, oops, are also, I carry them around and I use them often. You can see I've ripped one, but I use them often. And they are over here. And I'm not joking when I say confirm and confront. Confirm and confront. And don't be afraid to ask questions. And on that note, I'm going to start with a question that was asked online. And Brooke, would you give it to me? Do you remember what it was so that you can give it to me in your own words?
The one I asked?
The one you asked, yeah.
I think I asked a whole bunch.
Well, I think it was the one about the nativity.
Oh, yeah. I need to find it, but when I was asking this question, I was thinking about them.
Oh, here you go. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if that was, they can show an activity as long as they show the secular one. That's what's in this pamphlet, if you open it up. But is that just for religious beliefs, or is it for all beliefs? Because there's a whole bunch of ideologies that are like religious beliefs. And so just wondering.
So my contention would be that they have to show both sides for everything. But there also has to be, and that's been regulated. It's, I forget the name of the SCOTUS ruling, but teacher speech with regard to displays, as well as what they say, is regulated. It's regulated by SCOTUS rulings, and they cannot put political propaganda on the wall, nor can they put religious propaganda on the wall unless it serves an educational purpose. So to go to your first question, you know, the nativity, I think they said, as long as they show the secular version of the holiday alongside the nativity, a teacher can absolutely display a nativity in their classroom. So my question would be, what is the educational purpose of that nativity, and can the teacher defend it in the third person, yo?
So it's only for educational purposes.
I don't know that it's only for educational purposes. A lot of schools celebrate the winter holidays, right? But I think that they need to be able to discuss what educational purposes that nativity has. And there are a lot. You know, this is America. Welcome to our country. We've got a lot of immigrants in America. A great portion of the population celebrates Christmas in regard to the Christmas tradition. Some celebrate a hybrid of Santa Claus and Christ's birth. And some only celebrate Santa Claus, and that's their business. This represents the one. And you could say something like, The Christian tradition believes that Jesus Christ was God incarnate. He came the savior of the world. He, God and as a baby, the whole bit, right? You can say whatever is truthful about that faith tradition, but it should always be stated in the third person. Sometimes kids can tell what a teacher's faith tradition is. And sometimes it's by their headdress. Sometimes it's by the cross necklace that they wear. Sometimes it's because they see them at church on Sunday. It's just a matter of fact. But in the classroom, teachers should always be speaking in the third person, in my opinion. And if there is no educational purpose for political propaganda, it has no place in the classroom. And that's Utah law. It has to have an educational purpose. And without that, it should not be there. And that was put out by USBE. And so if y'all want to give me your emails before you leave, USBE has a document. They put out a constitutional Utah law document, says right in there, can't do it. I think it's the first one. So, yes, ma'am.
I've heard they pulled that link.
They did pull that link.
Okay.
They did.
But we don't know why. We have a copy of it, so we have.
You have a copy of it? Yeah, so the link was pulled. No one knows why, and I'm not going to begin to speculate, especially on the internet.
But
Yeah, so the document was downloaded. It was a PDF. I think multiple people have it. I have it. I think a lot of people have it, but nevertheless, the link was pulled. It's no longer a live link, but it is in that document. So what other questions do we have? Yes, sir.
Using your. You can be loud.
really,
Yeah.
really loud.
I can be loud. So using your formula for both sides,
Mhm.
the other side would say, gay pride flag in my room is not political. It's about inclusion. Now, I don't know how I would defend that, but how do you recommend defending that? Because that's the argument. This isn't political. This isn't about right or left. This is about inclusion and making everybody feel safe.
I would respond to that with something to the effect of, never in my life has a student felt safe because of what was on my wall. Every single time, and I have been a teacher for a long time, and I'm an arts teacher. I've been in theater and music for the better part of 2 decades. And I have encountered kids of all walks of life, and never once have I gotten a letter that said they felt included by what I put on my wall. I have a 3-page letter from a transgender young girl that she wrote 3, 4, 7 years ago that said for the first time in her life, she felt welcomed. You know how many pride flags I had on my wall? 0. 0. Kids are not going to know that you care about them and that you value their humanity by a flag on the wall. They're going to know that you value their humanity and their value as a human life and a person, and that you value their struggles and their getting all caught up in their head. They're going to know that you value them and understand what they're going through by how you treat them and how you engage with them. In my opinion, the flag is meaningless because I see a lot of teachers with flags that are still really horrible to children. I felt like a preacher right there. I should go Southern again. I should go Southern. All right, I'm going to go over here and then let's go back here. Yes, ma'am.
I have 4 questions.
No, you know what? Yeah, why don't you come up just so the people online can hear, and then I'm going to answer a couple online questions after we go back here. Okay.
What do you risk by being here sharing this topic?
I risk my job, my career. There are policies that say that if I in any way bring ridicule or censure upon my district, I can be terminated without cause. The same as the Loudoun County guy who was put on leave, which by the way, oh, we brought up something new. I get excited. See, the people on the internet don't get to see me dance. They just get to see me like fight with myself, you know? But yeah, so the guy in Loudoun County, I forget his name. Those district policies are in every district, and y'all teachers are in a weird industry, very weird. And I would go so far as to say extremely unique. There's a practice in education. Obviously, everybody talks about teacher tenure, right? You know, I don't like it either, and I'm an educator. But what teacher tenure does is it prevents chaos from taking a position without due cause. That's really what it does. If an administrator is doing their job correctly, terminating a tenured teacher is not difficult. The general public thinks it is. But when it becomes difficult to terminate tenured educators, it's because administrators have sucked it up for a long time. And they don't have the patterns of behavior documented. They did not do evaluations appropriately. That's when it becomes difficult to terminate a tenured teacher. But tenure means that, in my opinion, you cannot terminate a teacher without just cause. And when I say just cause, most teachers are entitled to a hearing, usually by the Board of Education. Happens more often in small districts than in large districts, but it does happen. And being a teacher is a very interesting thing. So you have no guarantee to your job for like 3 years, and it actually has nothing to do with your evaluation. A lot of people think that too. Well, if they're doing a good job, they'll keep them. No, sometimes they just don't like their shoes, or they party on Saturday nights. Doesn't matter that they're a great math instructor. We don't like how they spend their Saturday nights. And there are morals clauses in teacher contracts in different places in the United States. And sometimes those moral clauses are very broad in scope, so they invoke them. So if my morals don't align with your morals, it's a little bit weird, and it's different in every district and different in every state. But yeah, there are policies in my school district that say if I bring ridicule or censure upon my district, that I can be terminated without notice, without hearing. And they're very broad, so they could invoke that. I hope that they don't, because I've done good work for them for a long time. But I do believe that there should be a power to the people. So, all right, next question.
Why do you think that the school district told you that they would leave those policies? What is their motivation for leaving policies that you pointed out were against the Bill of Rights, were against all those things that you pointed out to them?
Yeah.
Why are they leaving them, in your opinion?
Okay, so that was a district in Nebraska. And in my opinion, they left them in place because their legal counsel told them they could. You can make whatever policies you want until somebody challenges you. And the attorney's advice per the board president on the public record was, let changing the policies come as a result of a settlement. Don't just change them. And then the conversation happened, and it's recorded. So if you really want to go look for some small district in Nebraska and look at their board meeting, you can. But the conversation included something like, it keeps the kids in check. We have more control this way. And so unless a child and a parent challenges those policies legally, the attorney's advice was to let them stand, even though if they were challenged, they would lose. And I think they do it because they can, and parents don't push back. And parents need to push back. They need to push back more and more and more. Okay, what's next question?
Show you a,
Something here.
well, it's a pocket constitution and declaration, just like you have.
Uh-huh.
And member of the public in our district where I used to live,
Mhm.
took these pocket constitutions and delivered them to school, part of being.
Yeah.
And the district put a disclaimer on the pocket constitution. Put a disclaimer on it that says that they do not support what is in it. And I have a snapshot of it. I can show it to you. This is our school district. I know you're.
Okay.
It was from, so like this is from, you said Liberty Council.
Liberty Council.
The one that he had was from Hillsdale College.
Okay, so if all it was a publisher, I don't know that they have much justification for a disclaimer. I would actually, as a parent, if I were a parent in that district, I'd push back because as educators, when we sign that, we sign to uphold, defend. It's in most of my licensure, I sign a thing that says, I will defend the Constitution of the United States, just like any other government official, right? And there's an ethics clause, we have to go through ethics training. And we do not, part of my evaluation, at the very end, every time I'm evaluated, does Christina actively engage in complying with Utah law? Does she actively engage in complying with, and I don't know what the word is, I don't have to agree with it, but I have to abide by it. Abiding with code. Does she or does she not? Part of my evaluation, and if you've got schools saying, we don't endorse the Constitution of the United States, I would really, really question that. And I would, as a parent, push back, especially depending on the state. Because in every state that I've applied for licensure, I've had to assert that I will defend a child's rights and I will honor their rights under the United States Constitution and the Constitution of those states. So that seems very weird to me. I think somebody should sue. Definitely sue. And when I say sue, I do mean that. I don't mean go have a nice conversation. Because a lot of times what happens is the policies get changed as a result of lawsuit settlement. And that is super unfortunate, but nevertheless a harsh reality. We should be able to have conversations with school district officials and just have them say, you're right, I'm wrong, the law says this. But most often, just like in Loudoun County, Virginia, a teacher spoke on the public record and he was put on administrative leave in less than 24 hours because he spoke against the district narrative. And the courts found in his favor over and over and over. I don't even think the school is going to push it up. They found in his favor and they found that the restriction of his speech, even for a short period of time, caused irreparable damage. And I have that on PDF. I highlighted some things because I, read rulings for fun. It's my thing. All right, last question. We'll go to the back and then I'm going to answer the online questions. One more? Oh, we'll just finish up strong.
There was a door decorating contest
Mhm.
in a high school in the district I belong to again. The door decorating contest had AOC in her Met Gala dress that said tax the rich
Mhm.
in a high school. And then next to it, it said chances take courage. And I just wonder about I just want you to speak on that. I'd love your opinion on that. It would leak to me from people.
Okay. SCOTUS has ruled on that. They need to take it down. End of story. The Supreme Court has ruled on teacher displays and speech. It's in the code. It's there. And let's exchange information because like I said, my brain cells, I think, navigate it up there. Usually I can just go, oh, it's this one. Oh, it's this one. Not today. No, you put people in the room and my brain turns to mush. But it won't take me but 15 seconds to text you a link to that court case. It's been ruled on. It's suppressed speech. Teachers are not allowed to maintain or propagate a political position in the classroom. They cannot do it. Yes, ma'am.
So because you're a teacher, what advice would you give us as parents for how to address that? If we see something political, recommend we don't agree, how would you like to be approached by a parent to be challenged on something?
Okay, so the question is, as a teacher, if a parent disagreed with me about what I had put up in my classroom or something that I had said in the classroom, how would I like to be approached? First of all, I always like to be approached with, so my child said X, and I always, as a parent, and I like it when parents do this to me, I want you to hear me out, then I'm gonna ask a question, and then I want you to respond. I don't want you to get defensive right away. I want to explain where I'm at, and then I'm gonna ask some questions, And then I want you to respond. Because as a parent, if you don't hear a parent out as an educator, first of all, you've destroyed your relationship with that parent. The parent is the resident expert on their children. I don't know who says that, but I hear it a lot in Utah. But the parent is the resident expert in their child. And so it is important to honor that as an educator and just to put that into other terms. I have a friend who has a daughter with Prader-Willi syndrome. If you don't know much about that syndrome, I'll let you research it later, but it's pretty rare. And they have to go to a special thing at the University of Utah Children's Hospital every year. And this mama got a little sassy one time, and they said, "But you're not the expert." And she said, "Actually, I am. You might be the expert in the muscles, and you might be the expert in the brain, and you might be the expert on why my daughter cannot throw up and therefore might die. And you might be the expert on her bowels, and you might be the expert on why she's walking funny, and you might be the expert on her eyes. But I'm the child expert. I know this girl inside and out. I know what she can and cannot do. I'm the expert on my child." And so I think as teachers and as parents, I would encourage all parents to say, "I just want to have a dialogue, and I want you to hear me out. Then I'm going to ask some questions. I'd like you to answer those questions. And then I'd like to hear your thoughts." But I would take the position of authority, but not challenge. I wouldn't challenge too much. Just a teacher like me that's been doing this a long time, and I view myself as pretty ethical in the classroom. And when I say pretty ethical, I'm not going to say I don't make mistakes, because I do at least once a month, and then I tap out. I've reached the threshold. But I like parents who challenge me respectfully, and I try really hard to honor them as the resident experts of their children. As a parent, when I go to my students' teachers, I say, "So my child came home, and it took us a little while, but eventually it was disclosed." I say it was disclosed that X occurred today. And following that, this was the pattern of events. I try to depersonalize everything. I try not to make accusations. And then I say things like, "Could you help me understand why that decision was made?" As opposed to, "Why did you do that to my kid?" And "Could you help me understand why that decision was made?" And more often than not, I get pretty good results, And I have for years gotten pretty good results with my children's teachers. If it were something that I had on my wall, like I said, I'm very cautious about that. For many reasons. One is I personally think that the more you put on your wall, the more you risk alienating a child. So if it's not related to the subject area, we've got people in our schools, young people in our schools that are devout Muslims. We've got many who are devout members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We've got some who are members of other Christian denominations. The more stuff you put on your walls trying to make everybody feel included, the more you're going to alienate or offend someone. And like I said before, no child has ever said, "You, Mrs. Boggess, made me feel better because of what was on your wall." It was because I listened to them. I had a young boy, he's 27, 28 now. He came to me one day and he said, "This is so-and-so," and he's like, freaking out, right? Totally freaking out. And he says, "No." And I said, "Here's the deal. Breathe. Go ask a question. Do you want me to go with you?" And really? And I said, "Yeah, just go ask a question." I said, "Teachers got lots on their plates. Sometimes I get dyslexic hands and I input 001 instead of 100. Or not, it's happened like 6 times in my lifetime. I wouldn't freak out. I'd just go ask a question. And I do it in person, because oftentimes email can be distorted, especially when you're in escalated state. Just ask a question. But if a teacher has something on your wall, I would find out what law prevents that. And I would be armed with that language, even if you have to ask someone for that language. you know, the code says, and it says that your classroom needs to be politically neutral, and I noticed that you have Biden-Harris on your walls with some political slogans, but I don't see any other candidates for this election on your wall. And the law says that's not okay. Can you help me understand why you don't have those other two candidates on your wall? And sometimes the "can you help me understand" will go a long way with teachers. But I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of teachers that, and when I say this, I'm not trying to be disparaging in my profession, but just like in any profession, the snoot comes in, I know better comes in, I'm the expert comes in. Well, I might be the expert in how to best educate a child in music. I might be the expert in how to educate gifted children. But you are the expert in your child. And your teacher is not an attorney. So they need to understand, and teachers don't understand the law. There's a lot of teachers that are like, what, I can't do that? I'm so old right now, I just roll my eyes. Seriously? You should have learned this in college. You're in year 7. You can't do that. It's against the law. So I hope I answered your question without being too verbose. All right, so I'm gonna go on to online here. And the one question is, what about medical power of attorney? Are some kids getting vaccines without parental knowledge? I believe the answer to that question would be yes. Kids are getting vaccines without parental knowledge. There are forms that some buildings give out in different places across our nation, including in Utah, and it's a medical power of attorney form that allows the school to act as a medical agent on behalf of the parent. A lot of parents sign them not knowing what they've signed. Recently, Granite School District put out some sort of form, and it had a power of attorney, something on it, and somebody caught it, and they pushed back and they got it changed. But like I said, schools do a lot of things thinking no one will call them on it. They just do. And I personally think they know it's wrong, but they might not know. But if you've got a law degree and you're putting out medical power of attorney and documents for parents to sign, one would think you'd know whether or not it was legal. So there are forms that parents sign, sometimes as a part of registration, which to me is very dangerous. Parents assume that registration paperwork is required. Not all paperwork at registration is required. You have the right not to sign some of that stuff. And there are parents that sign away their medical power of attorney, especially in buildings with what are called like CLCs and different things like that. And administrators and teachers can take those children to the doctor and have medical treatment or evaluation administered without a parent present. So yeah, be very careful about that. The question, the next one. Oh, you have a follow-up on that one? Go ahead.
So, I love how you mentioned that we don't have to sign everything for registration. Oftentimes schools will say, if you haven't paid your fees or you haven't signed your papers, they will not release your children's grade, things like that. Can a school do that? Can they hold your child's grades hostage if you didn't sign something or pay something?
So I'm making a weird face. I'll make it for you guys too. In the age of online grade portals, I think it's kind of an empty threat. I think the bigger threat would be, can they hold a transcript? Can they hold your child's grades? Well, I suppose, but if you don't have a report card printed off the internet. My bigger concern would be the transcript for a college graduate. But there are fees that, again, and this is Utah, and there is a Utah standard. There are fees that parents are charged and they just pay them because they think they have to, but they really don't have to pay them. Free and appropriate public education is a real thing. And there are fees that are put on kids, and if you push back, a lot of times they'll remove. I had a student enrolled in a Granite High School, and I got, when I first registered him in Utah, I was like, great, $600 just to get my kid into school. I about passed out because we came from a state where it was literally free and appropriate public education. I didn't have to pay a dime. I didn't have to rent books, nothing. All I had to buy was the track shoes. Right? So that was just shocking to me. And then I went through my admin process and I was like, oh, I pay that stuff. So I went in the next time and I said, yeah, you need to remove that. And that one too, and that one, and that one. I will pay that one because I'm renting that instrument. Nope, that one's gotta go. She looked at me like this, she said, I'm gonna get an administrator for you. I said, please do, that's fine with me, I'll wait, I budgeted 2 hours for this. You know, and I do, I budget the time and I literally will say things like, I've got the time. I'm gonna be here a while, I'll wait. Go in, not in a rush, go in calm with plenty of time to spare and push back. Free and appropriate public education. Yeah. Did I answer that question? Okay, this other question said, can parents promote patriotism, capitalism, and the Constitution? Can parents? And it says, lately there are examples of schools saying those are political and cannot be upheld as better than other government ideology. I should roll my eye. Okay, we're in Utah, so let's talk Utah. Yes, parents can promote patriotism. Yes, they can promote capitalism. And yes, parents can promote the Constitution. Would you like to know why? They're the parents. They are the parents and they can promote whatever they want to. You have the right to educate your child as you see fit. Now, if you give them bad grammar, that's your own fault. If you give them inaccurate history and you tell them that Pythagorean's theorem is a lie, you're gonna have a very successful kid, but you have the right to educate your child as you see fit. It says lately there are examples of schools saying that patriotism, capitalism are political. I disagree, and I would go back to the definitions of those words. So when it comes to patriotism is a love of country. You know, things happened in Germany a long time ago that were horrific. And there are still patriotic Germans. They love their country, they love their homeland, they love the mountains, they love the Bavarian state. They love that, you know, King Ludwig the Third or whatever he was, I don't know if he was the third or the seventh, but I know it was Ludwig, right? And his castles and the operas that were there. And they love telling people that Neuschwanstein is a really big castle with only 3 floors finished. Like everybody thinks it's got all this stuff on the inside. Nope. They love it. And so patriotism is a thing. To engage in a love of country is not a bad thing and it's not political, in my opinion. And Utah law actually requires that we teach constitutional ideas as superior to. I do believe that's in the code. I would have to find it to quote it, but I do believe it's in our code to teach it as superior constitutional. And then it says capitalism and superior. Well, I think that would go back to, I don't know that a teacher could or should say capitalism is the best. I think you could probably in this day and age get a little bit shady with that. But I think what you should do if you're a good educator is look at clear and present examples of different forms of government. Tyranny, you got North Korea, right? We've got socialism in Venezuela. We've got capitalism in America. We've got socialism in other countries. We've got theocracies in the Middle East. So let's look at all these countries and let's look at things that we debate every day: women's rights, freedom, liberty, free agency. I mean, some students just don't know, and I'll use my nephew as an example. I was back home this summer and my nephew was there. He lives in Kansas City, and I came home from the store and he said, so how'd it go? He's a funny kid. I went to the store to get something and they live on a farm 33 miles from Walmart. So it was a trip. And he said, so how'd it go? And I said, well, it looks like socialism hit in town. So I only got half the list. And he looked at me and he said, I have no clue what you're talking about. And I had to explain to him that in socialist countries, food rationing is a very big thing. And you each get your portion, but when the store runs out, you don't get your portion. And that was very weird for him. He's like, for real? And we had a really great discussion. But I think it is okay to promote when you promote in the context of educating why. Why is it superior? Not just, hey, we love it and it's America, yeehaw, you know? It's more about the why and educating the process, because if you're just feeding kids, love this, do that, that's indoctrination. But when you give them the why and the evidence to support the why, then it's education. And the evidence should be also included in the why not. You know, people who advocate socialism often advocate a utopia that doesn't really exist in socialist countries. They advocate this utopia that never comes to fruition when socialism is installed. There's a manifesto, there's a way to do it, and everybody says, well, they did it wrong, but we're going to do it again. No. Tell them the whys, and then I think you can promote, if that makes sense. And then it says, those are political. Yeah, I would disagree that they're political. I would disagree that the Constitution is political. You know, there's a video online, it went viral, and I've seen a lot of teachers share it, and it's about, hey, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights was so wonderful, nobody else did it. Yeah. So those people liked power, and America liked the consent of the governed. Nobody else did it because nobody else wanted to give the power to the people. And our founders wanted to give the power to the people. So yes, that is a true statement. The whole world loved the Constitution and the Bill of Rights so much, no one else copied it. That is technically true. There are people that have come close, something similar, but technically no one has copied it. But that doesn't mean it's bad. That means that other countries opted not to give power to the people. The other question is, how do we fight this mentally? Dare I say we do it together? We have to be willing to answer the same question 50,000 times for the next parent. We have to be able to do that, even though you're like, this Tinker versus Des Moines, you crazy people, I said it, I put it on the internet. You know, go check the Facebook page. You know, I say that in a little bit of a hostile sense, because sometimes I do get that way. And I don't feel proud of myself when I do. I've answered this question. But I think it's about being willing to do it together, being willing to practice patience with people, being willing to walk with them. One of the things we hear a lot is compassion and compassion for people. And I'm like, no, that's not compassion. That's sympathy. No, that's not empathy. That's sympathy. Quit redefining words. Compassion means to suffer with, to walk through suffering with people. And when you have somebody walking through hell with a school district and their rights and their child's rights have been violated, something severely going wrong in the classroom, you walk with them. And even though your kid wasn't involved, you show up to the meeting anyway. Because there's power in numbers. How do we fight it mentally? We do it together. And we listen to people cry. And honestly, as much as I know that it just really stinks, we listen to people repeat themselves. We listen to people repeat themselves over and over and over again because they can't make sense out of nonsense. And we just do. So the last one, all right, so it says R277328, that wonderful rule that the USBE adopted, that was sarcastic, by the way. It was a rule that USBE adopted and it was highly contentious with them. It was R277328, that you cannot uphold one ideology over another using capitalism and Marxism as an example. And it does say that. I would question, and when I say I and many members of the public question 328's compliance and ability to be rectified with Utah law, I think someone should sue. Because there are many parts of that rule that are not under Utah law as it is presently written. They've tried to legislate feelings, among other things, and you cannot legislate how kids feel. You can, however, direct how teachers behave and how they engage with students. So, yes, our 277-328 does say that. I would question its alignment with Utah law, and then I would go back again to the example that you promote, if you will, through the teaching process of what is better. Do we build the bridge with toothpicks or do we build it with straws? We can promote without promoting. Does that make sense? So I do think that there is that. That's all the questions online. Do we have anything else? Because I have body language here that says, Christina, shut it, yo. That's your body language. It says, zip it, girlfriend. See, I am funny on occasion. What?
The library was giving free.
Oh, tell her I'm funny. She should join us. All right, yes, ma'am.
It's probably hard to political, I'm a firm believer in people standing up with each other.
Okay, so just a second. She said, the question is, she's a firm believer that people should stand up with each other to fight.
Tyranny that's going on by our government. We have the right to go to school board meetings and be heard. There's so many school board meetings, if you watch the internet, they're shutting their parents down. They are not letting them talk. And now our elected president has told the FBI to go to those school board meetings and arrest the parents if they dare speak out. How do we fight back against something like that?
So I'm gonna be straight with you. I think we need to talk after class. And not because it's too political, but because of time, and I don't think I can get that answer out in that long, but I do think we should do it together. So with that, let's chat after this and do that. If you guys want links, I've got books just before we go and before anybody logs off. This is a book you need to buy. I don't know if y'all can see that. Hopefully you can see that. It's called They've Crossed the Line. And it's the Patriot's Guide to Religious Freedom in America and in America's schools and workplaces. Wonderful, wonderful resource. It is the other one that I carry with me everywhere I go. And so it's called They've Crossed the Line. This book will cost you $3.88 on Amazon. So wonderful text. And so with that, if you're online, I want to thank you for joining us. And for all you here, I'm super thankful that you guys came out to hear little old me talk. I'm very humbled by the opportunity and thankful that y'all showed up. So if you have any questions, let's chat afterwards. But other than that, let's go ahead and shut it down and I can start helping these ladies take care of everything. So thank y'all very much. And we will speak with you all more soon. Thank you.